My name is Diana Cepeda, and I'm going to explain the relationship between breast cancer, pesticides, and environmental health. First off, the purpose of the study was to determine the relationship of triazines and breast cancer from a holistic perspective. The research questions used were: how does pesticides affect the body at a cellular level? How can a diagnosis of cancer can affect at a psychological level? And what are the residual effects of pesticides? Some of the facts are that according to the World Health Organization, 8.2 million people worldwide died from cancer in 2012, and 521,000 deaths were from breast cancer. But what is cancer? Cancer is defined as the uncontrolled growth of damaged cells. It is the second leading cause of death in the United States. Just like we age and die, our cells do it too. This is called apoptosis. When cells lose this ability, cancer develops, and it can be classified as benign or malignant. Benign cancer is a tumor that stays encapsulated in one place without spreading to adjacent tissues, and malignant cancer is a tumor that easily and rapidly spreads to the surrounding parts of the body. Pesticides have been highly linked to different types of cancer, and triazine is one of the most widely used pesticides worldwide. But why is it still used? Pesticides are chemical substances that are used to kill insects in agriculture. And even though some people claim that pesticides are useful, they have been highly linked to cancer for several years. According to Gandhi and Snedeker, pesticides are developed with the aim of helping the farmer protect crops from damage and thus increase the yield or the storage of live crops. Different pesticides may do so by preventing the growth of weeds or damage the crops by insects, rodents, and molds. So what is the government doing about this problem? The government is making investigations to find how to solve the problem by stopping or reducing the use of pesticides, but at the same time, they can be questionable. According to Farrell et al., the regulatory laws are based on a risk-benefit ratio, giving more weight to economic benefits of pest control against health and environmental hazards posed by them. So the study of pesticides is highly broad, and it is difficult to associate the physical and psychological consequences of pesticides with breast cancer without the use of different disciplines such as biology, psychology, and environmental science. Biology will concentrate on the understanding of how pesticides affect the body at a cellular level to promote the evolution of cancer cells and the presenting symptomatology of the disease. Psychology will focus on the effects that a diagnosis with cancer can have at an emotional level. And lastly, environmental science will focus on the residual effect of triazines in our environment. The most important aspect when addressing this problem is to find a reachable interdisciplinary solution to prevent the long-lasting effects of this pesticide. One of the proposals in this thesis will be developing at a state and federal level a reliable and strict way of testing the effects of triazines. Another action will be to provide complete and unbiased information about who and where are using this type of pesticide to consumers. This in return will leave the decision of consuming these products to the consumer without imposing blame on anyone. And lastly, but also very important, is teaching farmers, businesses, and companies that even the use of pesticides is more profitable. There are other ways like sustainable or alternative agriculture to prevent the use of them. This includes crop rotation, organic farming, and biological pest control. In literature review, we're going to start with biology. Biology is a science that studies living organisms. Pathophysiology is a subdiscipline that studies the psychological processes associated with disease and illness. The use of this discipline is necessary to understand the health effects of triazine causes in the body at a cellular level to produce cancer. This synthetic hormone mimics the function of estrogen, which is a sex hormone that promotes breast growth and sexual maturation. When found in high levels in the body, it promotes growth of estrogen-receptive tumors and rapid cell division, causing cancer. It is of great concern that in many reports, triazine herbicides such as atrazine have been shown to have detrimental reproductive and endocrine disrupting effects and have even been indicated in altered fertility rates in humans. And yet, the overall status of this compound is referred to as inconclusive with regard to their toxicity. Even though the study shows that triazines can be highly toxic to humans, the results are biased because the study was conducted in vitro and not in designated community with specific sample. Nonetheless, we are able to demonstrate that triazines are, even at a low level, can be the cause of this devastating disease because of their endocrine disrupting function. Triazines can also have long-lasting effects at a cellular level. Reina and Farron attempt to explain how high levels of atrazine encountered in the water can disrupt normal cell formation. This article focuses on how atrazine alters the hypothalamic pituitary axis function and how it affects the breast tissue over time. In this study, the method used was different types of rats treated with different dosages of triazines and observed the effects on breast tissue. Also, the article talks about the effects in early exposure in adolescents and chronic exposure in adult mammary tissue. It was found that atrazine halted the differentiation of breast cells, therefore leaving them undifferentiated and putting adolescent females at risk of developing cancer at a later time in life. Nonetheless, there is a high concern with the inconclusive data obtained from the research because these studies did not evaluate early life exposure and completely missed all of the critical periods of breast development, nor did they actually measure the population internal dose compared to the level in the water supplies. Another point to remember is that triazines are used in all states, but the study focused only on the Midwest, California, and Florida. Literature review in psychology. As we establish the relationship between breast cancer and triazines, now we'll take a closer look to what happens after diagnosis. Being diagnosed with cancer can not only affect physiological but also psychologically. Cancer is a common malignant disease among women worldwide. Being diagnosed with it can be very devastating. This disease can cause many psychological and social effects in cancer patients. There are many psychological effects such as depression, cognitive and sleep problems, fatigue, sexual problems, and fear of reoccurrence that can be a long-lasting consequence of the disease. The focus of the study by Ewerts and Jensen was the most frequent problems after diagnosis of and treatment of breast cancer, which were previously discussed. The methods used were review of different data on PubMed search. In the discussion, the author points out the reduced amount of programs to address psychological issues. He also proposes the development of a new follow-up procedure and advises that meaningful research should be done to provide new ways to deal with these side effects. This source supports the long-lasting psychological effects that breast cancer can have in women as a result of triazines. Environmental science. In order to understand how triazines stay in water, we must address how triazines are detrimental to the soil and carried away to underground water, and end up in the water we drink. According to Jablonov, Shasper, and Burrell, atrazine use has resulted in widespread combination of ground and surface waters and dispersal in the atmosphere. Atrazine is one of the most frequently detected pesticides in fresh water, posing a health risk to our society. Atrazine seems to have a long-lasting life. Even after the treatment of the soil, remains can still be found. The method used in this study was the application of triazines in the soil for several years to test for degradation. The result of the study were that triazines are an alarming pesticide due to the differentiating factors its metabolites persisted in the soil even after decades. This has led to the reconsideration of its use. Nonetheless, the authors recognize that even though they lack information in regards to exposure and individual response, there is a vast evidence that triazines are considered environmental hazards. Triazine is a highly used herbicide. The Environmental Protection Agency is in charge of conducting environmental assessment of the use of pesticides. The government is responsible for regulating the amount of exposure to prevent the development of detrimental health illnesses such as cancer. And even though the major prevention is regulation of the use of pesticides, the use of triazines is highly used in agriculture. Pesticides are an efficient tool for farmers in pest management. But during the last couple of years, the use of pesticides has been raising many questions. Pesticide application proved counterproductive because they kill beneficial species such as natural enemies of pests and increase the chances of developing of pest resistance to pesticides. Therefore, we can start questioning whether the benefits outweigh the consequences. Triazines eventually are going to the water we drink, exposing adjacent communities to the health effects of triazines. Even though many indicators are used to monitor the levels of pesticides, they are not accurate enough. Yet, and more research must be done to increase its preciseness, according to Damalas and Elefetherinos. According to Murray, Thomas and Boudreau, the focus of the research was the study of emerging pollutants and contaminants in fresh water, and being triazines one of them. The method used was literature research and tracing of human health data of the most common pesticides from data gathered from studies in Asia, Europe, and the United States. The findings were that the residuals of pesticides such as triazines are not well documented. Therefore, it is important to implement sampling and analytical protocols that document the occurrence and concentration of these compounds in the freshwater environment because they pose a human health hazard. The research component This research was conducted using the 10-step Repkos process. The population of interest for these studies all adults that have had or have the potential to be exposed to triazines. The methods used for data collection and review of the most relevant information in journals encountered through EBSCO, House Academic Search Premier was quantitative research. The words used were triazine, pesticides, cancer, environmental science, breast cancer, psychological effects, physiological effects, depression, and triazine's life. The information was scanned for 2 weeks and the most relevant data was chosen to ensure the quality and reliability of this research. The literature review design was a combination of meta-analysis and systematic review. Meta-analysis was used by combining and contrasting different results from several studies. One of the limitations of the study was the reduced amount of information about the psychological effect after the diagnosis of cancer in the population study. Most of the research made under this topic was about the residual life of triazines in the soil and underground water and its effect in the human body. To test the interdisciplinary understanding, the New World test was used by responding to 3 questions. Does it allow for more effective action? Does it help to answer the research question and is useful to the public who are concerned with a particular complex problem? Now we're going to talk about the theories. To understand the health effects of triazines in the human body at a cellular level, the somatic mutation theory was used. The somatic theory claims that those wildly dissimilar agents will somehow cause either the propagation of already mutated cells or generate mutations in genes that either directly or indirectly mediate the control of the proliferation of cells that would eventually become neoplastic, as quoted in Sonnenschein and Soto. As we mentioned before, breast cells are responsive to estrogen, and triazine is an estrogen-like pesticide that promotes growth of altered cells, or it can cause cells to divide more rapidly, leading to DNA changes and promoting cancerous cells. Hence, the cause of cancer will be DNA mutations, and explanation of the cancer phenotype becomes altered control of cell proliferation of the cell cycle. In this theory, pesticides are considered proto-oncogene cell inducer. This is because sometimes these environmental toxins cause tumor suppressor cells to lose its multiple abilities to stop cancer, and breast cells, being estrogen triazine responsive, they end up growing uncontrollably, leading to breast cancer formation. Individuals have different ways of coping with stressful life events. Being diagnosed with cancer can be challenging and have a great emotional impact. The theory used to understand the psychological effects of the population with breast cancer due to triazine was a transactional model of stress and coping. According to Lazarus, contended that stress did not exist in the event, but rather is a result of transaction between a person and his or her environment. Therefore, leading breast cancer individuals with multiple long-lasting problems such as depression, fear, constant stress, among others. Also, when individuals experience stressful events, it can affect their level of adaptation. There are 2 types of coping mechanism, emotion and problem focus. Coping with emotion includes anxiety, sadness, anger, and depression. Problem focus is actually doing something proactive to reduce the stress level. According to Lyon, the theories propose 3 types of adaptational outcomes: functioning in work and social living, moral life or life satisfaction, and somatic health. Social living is the ability to function in the community. Moral or life satisfaction refers to how individuals feel about the overall picture of their lives, and somatic health is how the body affects by stress. The way this theory was used to correlate triazine's breast cancer diagnosis and psychological effects was by focusing on how the individuals deal with the stress, and at what level it impacted their lives and how they function after and during the treatment. Lastly, rapid population growth is a problem that our society has been facing for the last couple of years. To understand how pesticides end up in the water, we use the Malthusian theory. Malthus believed that the world's population tend to increase at a faster rate than its food supply. So nowadays, there has been an increase in the use of pesticides like triazines to increase production and decrease the cost of farmers. Because the population grows, the food demand increases. This leads to higher use of pesticides to support the needs of the population and increase and ensure adequate food supply, and eventually leading to high concentrations of pesticides in the soil that eventually ends up in the groundwater. Now the results. We're going to start by biology. As the literature was reviewed, several correlations between breast cancer and pesticides were found. As it was mentioned before, one of the most used pesticides is triazine, which is an endocrine disruptor. Studies by Reiner et al. Concluded that intrauterine exposure of atrazine compounds results in delayed development of mammary glands, a known risk factor for breast neoplasm, according to Ferro, Parvatheni, Patel, and Sheritaya. In another study performed by Rich, Gabriel, In Schultz-Norton, it was found that increases in cell biology in the MCF7 mammary epithelial cancer cell after treatment with 7-beta estradiol, therefore making cells more prone to become cancerous and form tumors. On the other hand, we found that even though with the presence of pesticides, there are individuals that are prone to breast cancer. Nonetheless, their exposure to triazines increased their chances of developing this disease. One of the most significant findings by Rich, Gabriel, and Schultz-Norton was that Environmental Protection Agency continues to maintain that simazine is not a carcinogenic compound. Derivatives of simazine have been shown to disrupt the hypothalamic pituitary gonadal axis, which in turn can alter the growth of the mammary tissue, leading to a tremendous response from breast cancer to alter the composition and cause malignant growth in the breast. The review of the articles was very informative by bridging cancer and the psychological effects from a holistic perspective. Therefore, the focus given to this study seemed appropriate because of the little research that has been placed in the psychological health effects of cancer. On the other hand, there were not a lot of studies found in the psychological effects of breast cancer. Not a lot of emphasis has been done, even though it leads to a compromise in the quality of life for the individuals and their families. Stress and coping were the major variables that influenced the response of individuals to this disease. According to Jablon, Shasper, and Burrell, the main consequences were depression, fear of reoccurrence, and cognitive problems, fatigue, divorce, among others. So there are many psychological consequences for breast cancer. Therefore, more research should be done in the consequences that individuals exposed to triazines can have after developing cancer. Pesticides can have a long life and remain in the soil for several years. Already Capriero et al. Found that 83% of initially applied atrazine actively remain in the soil after an aging period of 9 years. In a study done by Jablonos, Schaffer, and Burrell, was found that atrazine in an agricultural soil extractable in much higher amounts 20 years after the last field application, as well as a number of atrazine metabolites in agricultural soils without documented atrazine application history. Making the population aware of the remains of pesticides in the soil is highly important to prevent or limit the exposure and lower the risk of breast cancer. Nonetheless, the monitoring levels of pesticides in the water and soil must be reviewed to prevent higher levels of accumulation. Now we're going to talk about the conclusion. Throughout the time, humans have been very responsible for many of the diseases and illnesses that affect us, such as breast cancer. And as a result, individuals have long-lasting psychological effects. One of the main causes of breast cancer is the use of pesticides. The family of triazines is a highly used pesticide in the U.S., even though in other countries has been banned because of its detrimental health effect. Through research, it was able to come to the conclusion that the use of pesticide needs to be decreased since it will be impossible to completely stop farmers from using it. Pesticides are needed to kill moles, insects, and pests. But on the other hand, buying these products poses an unavoidable health risk, which in the study was breast cancer. It cannot be assumed that pesticides are the only risk factor for breast cancer, but it's still one of the major ones. And consumers have the open choice of deciding on the products that they will be bought. One of the ways that consumers can decrease pesticides in their diet is by buying organic products. Organic products must be grown in the safe soil, have no modification, and must remain separated from conventional products. Farmers are not allowed to use synthetic pesticides, bioengineering genes, petroleum-based fertilizers, and sewage sludge fertilizers. There are many products that contain higher levels of pesticides, therefore the emphasis made on the consumption of organic products is highly recommended. On the other hand, it must be accepted that these products are more expensive than non-organic products. Nonetheless, another way to decrease the risk of breast cancer due to pesticides is effectively washing non-organic products. A diagnosis of breast cancer can have detrimental psychological health effects such as depression, sexual, sleeping, and relationship problems. An emphasis has to be made on assessing the coping mechanisms that individuals have at the time of diagnosis. Also, an assessment of the acceptable stress levels that the individual can manage should be made. Not all individuals are able to cope in the same way. Lastly, soil depletion and water contamination are serious consequences. Cancer is a common diagnosis, and solution might be in using alternative methods in pesticides. Sustainable agriculture is one of the few practices that has been recently implemented. Another example is the use of biological pest control. Also, biocontrol provided by these living organisms is especially important for reducing these numbers. Overall, the decrease of use of pesticides is highly encouraged. The debate over the use of pesticides will continue over the years. These are my references. Thank you so much for listening.